So here we have a 2006 Dodge Ram 3500. I've got about 150,000 miles on the engine right now, and it's running pretty rough. So best I can tell is I've got an injector that's not acting properly. I'm not getting any codes, but idles rough and runs rough all the way through the ranges. I've already adjusted intake and exhaust valves, and that really didn't seem to help too much. So we're going to do an injector job. Picked up a brand new set of injectors from injectorsdirect.com. New tubes, new gasket, and let's see how it goes. We'll start off by getting this valve cover off. And this is my trusty helper for today, my son. Yeah. So now we have the valve cover off, intake horn off, got the grid heater off, started unplugging the electronics going to the injector harness, and we are going to disconnect each one of the injector, and then we will take the exhaust rocker off of each cylinder. That way we can access the injectors themselves. So currently loosening all the injector wires, 8mm on those, and you want to be pretty gentle with it. They're fairly fragile.
You might want to.
Okay, all the injector wires are removed. Now we're going to lift the harness out of there, and we have one more connection for your injector harness back there. But once we pull it out a little bit, we can get to it a little better, and we'll disconnect that one. All right, so before we pull these injectors out, I'm going to just do a quick check and check the ohms across them to see if I have a definitive one that's bad. So we're looking at 0.7, 0.6. Point 6. What I think is happened is one of them got plugged a little bit, I think, is what's going on. So they're all within spec. I checked the new ones, and that's what they read as well. So now that we have the injector harness off, in order to get down to the injector hold down bolt, it is underneath that exhaust rocker. So we're going to pull the exhaust rockers off every cylinder. We'll be able to get down to the injection hold down bolt and start working that. We still have to get the tubes off all the way back. Go. All right, we've got all the exhaust rockers loose. We're going to go ahead and pull them off, and we're going to keep them in order. You don't have to pull your push rods. So your rocker arm, it's got a little nipple on there, and they all face the intake side. I don't know if it matters. Sorry, they face the exhaust side. I don't know if it matters, but they appear to all be facing that way. We're going to take them out. We're going to line them up in the order that they came out, where they go. Number 1, number 2, and so on. So now we have all the exhaust rocker arms and tappets out. We need to remove our fuel lines so we can get to the feed tube, because it seats in through here right across into this injector. And so that has to be removed before you can pop the injector out. So I'm not even going to loosen the injector until I get those feed tubes out. So now we got all the fuel tubes and feed tubes pulled out. I went ahead and put a rag over the common rail there, just to keep dirt and whatnot out of it. And I went ahead and pulled the motor lifting bracket. It sure helped in trying to get to that number 6 feed tube and high pressure line. So now we're going to work on the injectors and start pulling them out. All right, to get the injectors out, take a little crowfoot pry bar and get underneath the mounting plate and give it just a little pop, and there it comes out. You want to make sure that copper washer's on there, and a little carbon buildup on them. And we'll keep these in order. I plan on probably keeping these and sending them out to be tested. And we'll see. We'll see if I got a definite bad one. Okay, so got all the injectors out, injector lines, feed tubes, exhaust rockers. So now we're going to go back in, and I have them lined out in order from back of the engine to the front of the engine. New injectors and feed tubes right here. And since number 6 is the hardest to get out, I'm going to start with number 6 and work my way to the front of the engine. So it's too hard to film all the way back to the number 6 cylinder and so you can see what I'm doing. But you got this little hole here that the feed tube seats into. It's a kind of a crush gasket, crush washer style. That seat has to come and line up with that feed tube. So that hole, you're going to set it down in there, lined up that way. But I'm going to start at number 6. I'll explain it a little more once we get closer to the front. All right, so you really want to be careful and clean right around the ends there. Need to put a little bit of, I've got some silicone lubricant. You can use Vaseline or whatever, but I'm just giving that O-ring just a little bit of lube. Be careful not to get it inside that hole where your feed tube meets up. Line it up. Make sure your little copper washer's on there. Put it in there. Push down and it clicks. And that's pretty much that. So here's your feed tube. I would recommend changing them every time you change injectors. They're not that expensive compared to the grand scheme of things. It's got a little nipple on the top that makes sure you orient it up. We're going to go ahead and put a little silicone lube on the O-ring. And with anything injector related, you want to be as clean as possible. You don't want to get any dirt down inside there or mess with that. We'll do number 1 right here. It's lined up. We'll slide it in. And it won't go in if you heard it click. And I felt the injector. I was holding the injector as I pushed it in, and I felt the injector click as well. So that's seated in there, and then we'll put our lock nuts on there and torque them down. All right, so now that we have all our injectors installed, all of our feed tubes installed, the directions say to torque down your injector hold down bolts to 44 inch-pounds and then back them off. That's just to ensure that the injector is fully seated, but you're going to back them off so when you torque down your feed tube, it is properly lined up into the injector. And you're going to torque down the feed tube, pre-torque of 11 foot-pounds, and then you're going to come back and torque down your injectors to 89 inch-pounds. And then you'll come back to your feed tubes and torque those to 37 foot-pounds. So we're going to go ahead and set our torque wrench. And it's 44. And so you want to torque these down. I've just got them finger tight. You want to torque them down evenly. And so I'm just going to give each one of them a little turn until we hit 44 inch-pounds. There's 44, 44. Okay. Now that we hit 44 inch-pounds, we're going to go ahead and back it off. And so now they're finger tight again. And we'll torque that to 11 foot-pounds. All right, so we're going to torque each injector hold-down bolt to 89 inch-pounds. We already have the feed tubes pre-torqued to 11 foot-pounds. And so here we go. And we're going to torque them evenly. So we'll give each bolt about a 90-degree at a time until we hit torque. Here's torque on that one. Here's torque. Okay. With all the injectors torqued, feed tubes torqued, now we're going to reinstall our exhaust rocker and tappets, and we'll torque those down to 27 foot-pounds. And of course we'll start in the very back just because it's the hardest one to get to, work our way forward. And then we go to installing our high pressure lines to the common rail. Put our air intake horn back on. Okay, we got everything torqued down. New wire harness for the injectors, and these little nuts here, be real careful. They don't have to be super tight, just snug. Intake horn back on, heater grid, new gaskets, all new tubes. We're gonna go ahead and attempt to Fire it up before we put the valve cover on. With these Dodges, you really don't have to bleed any injector lines or anything like that. They are self-bleeding. So turn the key on, let your pump run for a little bit. Do that a few times and then go ahead and start cranking. And it might fire up and die and fire up and die a couple of times, but it should eventually start up. So we're going to see if it does. We're going to hook the batteries up and attempt to give it a run. Key on.
Key is on.
Key off. Push the parking brake, take it out of gear. Key on. When it's done running the cycle, go ahead and try to start it. Try it again. Cut it off. Start it again.